Shalom, shalom, brothers and sisters. Shalom, shalom. Welcome back to the channel. Welcome back to Trumpet's Call. I'm AmarYaH. I pray that you are holding on to faith, amunah, and holding on to hope during these times. I thank you for joining me once again on the channel and for another session of our Pagan Insertions in the Scriptures, Holiday Edition. And today we're going to be talking about the dreaded holiday of Halloween. Now, it is my hope and my prayer that this lesson is unnecessary because most, if not many of you, know that Halloween is not something that AmarYaH, our Heavenly Father Yahuwah, wants us to celebrate. But Abba told me to do the lesson, and so it is my job to obey. So I pray that as you listen and as you glean from this message today, that you will learn things that you had already known, or that if you hadn't already known, the Father has laid in your ruach a need to stay away from this particular holiday, and indeed all of the world's holidays, okay? We celebrate the Kadash days, the holy days of Yahuwah, not the pagan days of this world. So, as we get into this discussion today, we're going to be talking about things related to ghosts and goblins and spiders and bats. Oh, how creepy. We're going to be talking about things related to jack-o'-lanterns and black cats. We're going to be talking about trick-or-treating and the desire for people to give you a treat or you'll give them a trick. What does that mean anyway? Where does that come from? Do you know? We're going to talk about that today. Not to mention the fact that candy corn, oh my word, when you eat it, I think it rots your teeth immediately. We're not going to be talking about candy corn, but it is my prayer that you would stay far away from candy corn. It is wax and sugar and food dye. Look at it. We're also going to be talking about things related to witches and the bewitching hour. So let's get into it today. Let's get into it. We're going to be talking about Halloween and what is it? Where did it originate? And should you be celebrating it? We're going to begin with the word bewitched. This is where Abba wanted me to start, and so we're going to begin with this word. What does it mean to be bewitched? We often use the word bewitched to mean affected as if by a magic spell. Bewitchment can refer to the effect another person or experience has on someone. For example, we may say, he was bewitched by her beauty, meaning that he was smitten by a pretty girl. The Bible warns of another kind of bewitching. Okay, so before we get started in today's lesson, I wanted to point out to you that many of us have been bewitched in this world. We were taught that we were supposed to engage in certain kinds of activities on certain days for certain reasons. And sometimes we weren't even given the reasons why we were to do these things. We were just told, this is what you do. Dress up in a costume, go from door to door, and ask people for candy, and they will give you candy. We were bewitched. We were operating as if by a magic spell. And also, related to that, there seems to be sometimes people in our lives who have a bewitching effect on us. They tell us things. Sometimes even our own parents, unfortunately. Our parents tell us, dress up in this costume, go door to door and get candy, and it'll be well. And they did it from ignorance, but still, the effect was that we did what they told us to do, and then we grew up, and then we did it with our own children. And so the bewitching was propagated and it was promoted to the next generation. And that is where it has to end. With us. We are that next generation, or if we've done it with our children, perhaps our children can hear this message or hear you speak of this message and say, the buck stops with me, no more. We will do this no more. Okay? So let's continue on with the word bewitch. It is defined as to attract or interest someone a lot, so you have the power to influence them. To put a magic spell on someone or something in order to control him, her, or it. The idea behind this word of being bewitched is the idea of control. Ultimately, it's about control. So someone can be really attractive and want to have a relationship with you so that they can control you, because their influence over you is great, because you desire to be in their company, because when you're with them, you feel as if your status has increased 10 degrees. Hey, I get to hang out with her. I get to hang out with him. That means I'm special. That means I'm something that I didn't think I was before. And so by hanging out with this person, you feel good about yourself. And then that person begins to exert control over you, asking you to do things you shouldn't do, asking you to go places you shouldn't go. And you do it. You've been bewitched. We've been bewitched in this world, brothers and sisters. And it's time that we shake ourselves awake by the power of the Most High. We see this word bewitched in the scriptures, in the Berit Hadashah, or what they call the New Testament. And the word in Greek is baskaino, and it means to slander, to bewitch, to give the evil eye to fascinate, to bewitch or to overpower. And in the details section here, under baskanino, it says to cast an evil spell, wishing injury upon someone, to properly exercise evil power over someone, like putting them under a spell, as seen in Galatians chapter 3, verse 1. It also means to captivate or to be spellbinding, appealing to someone's vanity and selfishness, to blight by the evil eye. In classic Greek, Aristotle used this word as if to say bewitching through the use of an evil power, to put someone under a spell so that they can no longer think. And that is the idea behind many of these holidays. We have been bewitched into believing that these are things that we should do. This particular holiday is particularly insidious because it looks evil, it reads evil, it feels evil. But we celebrated these holidays in churches. Oh, they called it Fun Festival or Fall Festival. But trust and believe, we were celebrating Halloween in churches. So these things became a part of our lives, and we were bewitched into believing that these were things that were okay to do. So every October 31st, we, with our bewitched selves, would go out, dress up in costumes, go door to door, asking for candy. And we would tell the people, give me a treat or I'll give you a trick, not knowing what we were saying and not knowing what it meant. So we're going to continue on with this lesson today. And I pray that as a result of hearing this lesson, you will no longer be bewitched. You will no longer have a spell cast over you, so that you will be able to see and understand the things that those who are in power want us to do to defile ourselves. As long as we remain in sin, brothers and sisters, our deliverance is far from us. We've got to turn. We've got to turn and remember Yahuwah in our captivity. And that means we've got to turn away from the very appearance of evil. In this particular holiday, it is evil. It is pure evil. So let's get into it for today. We're going to begin our discussion of Halloween with where it's purported to originally have begun, with this ancient Celtic festival of Samhain. And let's read. Samhain, in ancient Celtic religion, one of the most important and sinister calendar festivals of the year. At Samhain, held on November 1st, the world of the gods was believed to be made visible to humankind, and the gods played many tricks on their mortal worshippers. It was a time fraught with danger, charged with fear, and full of supernatural episodes. Sacrifices and propitiations of every kind were thought to be vital, for without them, the Celts believed they could not prevail over the perils of the season or counteract the activities of the deities. Samhain was an important precursor to Halloween. And you can read more about that in Britannica.com and the link that I have provided. So the idea here, to get things kicked off, is that this annual Celtic festival of Samhain occurred on November 1st. And they believed that the veil was thinned and that the gods and the demonic forces of the world came near and would wreak havoc on those who didn't have any kind of protection from them. And so they devised strategies to try to protect themselves so that when this happened on November 1st, they would not perish. Okay? And so what we see is the formation of the activities that surround Halloween. So let's get into it. We're going to be reading an article from World History Encyclopedia on the history of Halloween by Joshua Mark. Halloween traditions in the West date back thousands of years to the festival of Samhain, the Celtic New Year's festival. The name means summer's end, and the festival marked the close of the harvest season and the coming of winter. The Celts believed that the veil between the worlds of the living and the dead was thinnest at this time, so the dead could return and walk where they had before. Further, those who had died in the past year who, for one reason or another, had not yet moved on, could do so at this time and might interact with the living and saying goodbye. Very little is known of the rituals of ancient Samhain because the church Christianized it. Note that, brothers and sisters, this ancient festival was adopted by Christianity, Catholicism, and it became a part of their offerings. So there are some aspects of it that's been lost to history. As with many pagan festivals, yes, the church, Christianity, Catholicism adopted many pagan festivals and made it a part of their Christian feasts and holidays. Continuing. And what information is available comes from Irish monks who recorded the pre-Christian history of their people as well as other Christian scribes denigrating pagan rites. It seems, however, that the observance included stocking up supplies for the winter, slaughtering cattle, and disposing of the bones in bonfires, which in time came to be known as bonfires. Yes, bonfires were originally bonefires, and cattle were not the only things that they burned. They burned the bones of human beings as well. But we're going to get into that in just a bit. There were gatherings of communities for feasting and drinking while this was going on, but there was also the awareness of the thin time of the year and the possibility of otherworldly visitors showing up at their party. Departed loved ones were expected and welcomed, and the practice of setting out favorite foods for the dead may have originated as early as 2,000 years ago, though this is unclear. But many other kinds of spirits, some which never had human form, could also appear. Elves, fairies, and wee folk, sprites, and dark energies were just as likely to pay a visit as those one longed to see again one last time. Further, there was a very good chance that the spirit of a person one may have wronged would also make an appearance. In order to deceive the spirits, people darkened their faces with ashes from the bonfires, a practice later known as guising or disguising or costuming, and this developed into wearing masks. A living person would recognize the spirit of a loved one and could then reveal themselves, but otherwise remain safe from the unwanted attention of darker forces. The Christianization of pagan symbols, temples, festivals, legends, and religious iconography is well established and applies to the Samhain festival as well as many others. Pope Boniface IV had set May 13th as All Saints' Day or All Hallows' Day, a feast day to celebrate those saints who did not have a day of their own. In the 7th century, when he consecrated the great pagan temple of the Pantheon in Rome to St. Mary and Christian martyrs, but in the 8th century, Pope Gregory III moved the date of the feast to November 1st. Okay? So we have All Saints' Day or All Hallows' Day used to be May 13th, but it was moved by Pope Gregory III to November 1st. Okay? And on this day, All Saints' Day is a day to celebrate essentially dead saints. Okay? Dead people. We have the Christian Catholic Church celebrating dead saints on November 1st. Okay. The motivation for this move is still debated. Some scholars claim it was done intentionally to Christianize Samhain by turning it into All Hallows Eve, which is most likely true, as the move follows an established Christian paradigm of redeeming all things pagan in an effort to ease the conversion process of a given population. And we know this is exactly what happened. When Christianity became the religion of Rome, we find that many of the pagan festivals, the people in this really vast area of Rome, which encompassed so many different areas, and people had different gods and goddesses and holidays and festivals that they celebrated. When they came to Christianity, they wanted to be able to continue those things. So the church found a way to incorporate or redeem all of those holidays and bring it into the church by changing a few names, changing a few details, and making them Christian holidays. Continuing. Prior to Christianization, May 13th had been the last day of the Roman festival of AmarYaH, which ran the 9th, the 11th, and the 13th of May, dedicated to placating the angry or restless dead. So, this Roman festival, which was May 13th, was designed and dedicated to placating angry or restless dead. It was May 13th. Pope Gregory III moved this to November 1st. Okay? The festival developed from a pair of observances held earlier in the year, Parentalia, which honored the spirits of one's ancestors, and this was the 13th through the 21st of February. And also Feralia, which honored the spirits of lost loved ones on February 21st. On Feralia, the living were obligated to remember and visit the graves of the dead and leave them gifts in the form of grains, salt, bread soaked in wine, and wreaths accompanied by violet petals. So we see all of these holidays that were being celebrated around this time, around May, between May and February, being consolidated here as we're moving this festival now to November 1st. Okay? And we're calling it All Hallows Day. And they're incorporating many of the aspects of Parentalia, Feralia, and AmarYaH, and many others. Continuing. Other influence on development. As it was with Parentalia, Feralia, AmarYaH, and many others, so it was with Samhain. Previously, the Samhain festival was associated with all those who had gone on before with the earth and the change of the year. This transformation was marked by celebration and communal activities. Once the festival was Christianized, All Hallows Eve became a night of vigil, prayer, and fasting in preparation for the next day when the saints were honored at a far tamer celebration. The old ways had not died out, however, and bonfires were still lighted, only now in honor of Christian heroes, and the turning of the seasons was still observed, only now to the glory of Christ. Many of the rituals which accompany this new incarnation of the festival are unknown, but by the 16th century, the practice of souling had become integral. The poor of the town or city would go about knocking on doors asking for a soul cake, also known as a soul mass cake, in return for prayers. So what this is essentially you have people who are poor who don't have provision. They don't have food. So during this festival on November 1st, the poor would go about knocking on doors and asking people for a soul cake. It's a special cake baked with honey or baked with a sweetener. It was like a honey cake. And they would be given these honey cakes in exchange for agreeing to pray for the dead relatives of those who lived in those houses. So they were being given a treat in exchange for a favor. So they pray, and then they get a treat of a honey cake or a soul cake. Okay? Continuing. This practice is thought to have begun in response to the belief in purgatory, where it was thought a soul lingered in torment unless elevated by prayer, and most often money paid to the church. So the Catholics believe in purgatory, that when you die, if you are not righteous, you go to a place where you burn for a while, and after you've burned for a while, suffered for a while, had people pray for you on the other side, then you get elevated, okay, into a better existence. So the poor went around door to door praying for the souls of those who were in purgatory in exchange for a soul cake. Continuing. After the Protestant Reformation, souling continued in Britain. Only now, the Protestant young and poor offered to pray for the people of the house and their loved ones instead of those in purgatory, while Catholics continued the older tradition. So, just because we had the Reformation and just because Protestantism was born, it doesn't mean that the traditions ended. They just changed a little bit, but they persisted. Continuing. Coming to North America. When the British came to North America, they brought these traditions with them. The Puritans of New England, who refused to observe any holidays which might be associated with pagan beliefs, including Christmas and Easter, kept the observance of Guy Fawkes Day on November 5th as a reminder of their supposed moral superiority to Catholics. Guy Fawkes continued to be celebrated up until the American Revolution, 1775 through 1783. The rituals of Samhain arrived in the United States less than a century later with the displacement of the Irish in 1845 through 1849 during the potato famine. The Irish, largely Catholic, continued to observe All Hallows Eve, All Saints' Day, and All Souls' Day, along with the practice of souling. But these festivals by now were infused with folk traditions such as jack-o'-lanterns. The jack-o'-lantern is associated with the Irish folklore of Stingy Jack, a clever drunk and con man who fooled the devil into banning him from hell, but because of his sinful life could not enter heaven. After his death, he roamed the world carrying a small lantern made of a turnip, with a red-hot ember from hell inside to light his way. Scholars believe this legend evolved from sightings of will-o'-wisp, swamp and marsh grasses which glowed in the night. On All Hallows Eve, the Irish hollowed out turnips and carved them with faces, placing a candle inside so that they went about souling on the night when the veil between life and death was thinnest. They would be protected from spirits like Stingy Jack. And you have on the screen a picture of the original jack-o'-lantern. This is what it looked like before we transferred from turnips to pumpkins. The basics of Halloween were now in place, with people going from house to house asking for sweet treats in the form of soul cakes and carrying jack-o'-lanterns. Shortly after their arrival in the United States, the Irish traded the turnip for the pumpkin as their lantern of choice, as it was much easier to carve. Guy Fawkes Day was no longer celebrated in the United States, but aspects of it attached themselves to the Catholic holidays of October, especially vandalism. Only now it was indiscriminate. Anyone's home or business could be vandalized around October 31st. So for those of you who may not be aware of Guy Fawkes and how it plays into Halloween, I'm going to read this little snippet of information from Wikipedia. Guy Fawkes Night. Guy Fawkes Night, also known as Guy Fawkes Day, Bonfire Night, and Fireworks Night, is an annual commemoration observed on November 5th, primarily in Great Britain, involving bonfires and fireworks displays. Its history begins with the events of November 5th, 1605, when Guy Fawkes, a member of the Gunpowder Plot, was arrested while guarding explosives the plotters had placed beneath the House of Lords. The Catholic plotters had intended to assassinate Protestant King James I and his Parliament. Celebrating that the king had survived, people lit bonfires around London. Months later, the observance of 5th of November Act mandated an annual public day of thanksgiving for the plot's failure. Within a few decades, Gunpowder Treason Day, as it was known, became the predominant English state commemoration. As it carried strong Protestant religious overtones, it also became a focus for anti-Catholic sentiment. Puritans delivered sermons regarding the perceived dangers of popery, meaning having a pope, while during increasingly raucous celebrations, common folk burned effigies of popular hate figures such as the Pope. Towards the end of the 18th century, children began begging for money with effigies of Guy Fawkes, and the 5th of November gradually became known as Guy Fawkes Day. Towns such as Lewes and Guildford were in the 19th century scenes of increasingly violent class-based confrontations, fostering traditions those towns celebrate still, albeit peacefully. By 1670, London apprentices had turned November 5th into a fire festival, attacking not only popery but also sobriety and good order, demanding money from coach occupants for alcohol and bonfires. The burning of effigies, largely unknown to the Jacobeans, continued until 1673, when Charles's brother, the Duke of York, converted to Catholicism. So this article goes on to talk about anti-Catholic versus anti-Protestant sentiment that occurred in Great Britain at this time. And so the celebration of Guy Fawkes Night became a night that was associated with violence, with burning, and with crime, essentially. And so the celebration of Guy Fawkes Night and the celebration of All Hallows Eve, Halloween, on October 31st, began to merge, so much so that when people would go out to celebrate Halloween or All Hallows Eve, the elements of Guy Fawkes Night had crept into that event, so that people were now engaging in violence against others. So you have people who are now carrying pumpkins, who were used to celebrating Guy Fawkes Day in Europe, now in the Americas, celebrating it around October 31st. So this holiday, around October 31st, November 1st, became associated with violence because of its link to Guy Fawkes Day. Okay, so continuing. In the village of Hiawatha, Kansas, the morning after Halloween in 1912, a woman named Elizabeth Krebs grew tired of having her garden and entire town vandalized once a year by marauding children wearing masks, and initially, using her own resources, organized a party in 1913 for the young people who were, she hoped, she would tire them out enough that they would have no energy for destruction. She underestimated their determination, however, and the community was vandalized, as usual. In 1914, she involved the entire town, brought in a band, held a costume contest, and put on a parade, and her plan worked. People of all ages enjoyed a festive rather than disruptive Halloween. News of her success traveled outside of Kansas to other towns and cities which adopted the same course and established Halloween parties which included costume contests, parades, music, food, dancing, and sweet treats accompanied by frightening decorations of ghosts and goblins. Although Mrs. Krebs is sometimes cited as the mother of modern Halloween, this is not entirely true, as she did not institute the practice of going door to door asking for treats. That had been established in the past. Okay? So I wanted to add some clarity here as we are talking about Halloween. So this began, as I stated, All Saints' Day. The practice of commemorating the dead occurred on November 1st. The day before that is called All Hallows Eve. All Hallows Day was November 1st. The day prior to that was called All Hallows Eve, and eventually All Hallows Eve became Halloween. Okay? That is where the name came from, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more as we continue on. The party as a distraction from destruction, however, did not catch on nationwide, and by the 1920s, so-called Mischief Night had become a serious problem, not only in the United States, but also in Canada. How exactly the practice of destroying people's property on the night of the 31st of October morphed into going door to door asking for candy in return for leaving a home in one piece is unclear, but it was already established in Canada by 1927 when a newspaper article from Blackie, Alberta, Canada, featured a story about children going door to door in this way, and is the first known appearance in print of the phrase trick or treat. The children were given the candy, and the homeowner was left in peace. So originally, this holiday had morphed into something very violent, and then in Canada, we see the practice of children going door to door saying, "Give me a treat so that I don't give you a trick." so that I am not violent against your property, give me a treat. And so apparently in Canada, this is where we see the phrase trick or treat for the first time. So now we're going to read another article from Time magazine, and it's going to give a little more detail regarding the ancient Celtic feast or festival of Samhain. This article is by Katie Lang. Dressing up in costumes and trick-or-treating are popular Halloween activities, but few probably associated these lighthearted fall traditions with origins in Samhain, a 3-day ancient Celtic pagan festival. For the Celts, who lived during the Iron Age in what is now Ireland, Scotland, and the UK, and other parts of Northern Europe, Samhain, meaning literally in modern Irish, summer's end, marked the end of summer and kicked off the Celtic New Year. Ushering in a new year signaled a time of both death and rebirth, something that was doubly symbolic because it coincided with the end of a bountiful harvest season and the beginning of a cold and dark winter season that would present plenty of challenges. According to historian Nicholas Rogers, author of Halloween from Pagan Ritual to Party Night, Samhain was a time of stock-taking and perhaps sacrifice, including probably animal sacrifice, during which pastoral communities prepared to survive the winter. Rogers also notes that little is firmly known about the particulars of the holiday, since the limited sources available are either folkloric literature, like the Celtic sagas and Roman authors who have likely trashed the traditions of a culture with which they were often in conflict. To understand what we do know about Samhain, it's important to recognize how the structure of the year's calendar affected the Celts' religious practices. According to The Guardian, much of modern pagan practice is based on the wheel of the year, a major determining factor in Celtic worship. The Celtic year was divided into two halves, light and dark, which were delineated by 2 of the 4 annual fire festivals. In between, rituals or ceremonies were celebrated marking solstices, when night is either the shortest or the longest, or equinoxes, when day and night are equal. Samhain, the fire festival that marks the beginning of the dark half of the year, is situated between the autumn equinox and the winter solstice. Encyclopedia Britannica notes that during this festival, the world of the gods was believed to be made visible to humankind, leading to supernatural tricks and trouble. Ghosts of the dead and spirits from the other world were also thought to return to the earth during Samhain. To appease deities during this time, sacrifices, generally of crops and animals, were burned in bonfires or bonfires as a protective measure from other worldly beings, and offerings were left out for other visiting mischievous spirits. Tricks and pranks were often played, but blamed on fairies and spirits during the 3-day period when the line between the two worlds blurred. The spiritual undertones of the Samhain festival also lent themselves to looking to the future, an activity quite apropos to the start of the Celtic New Year. History.com notes that Druids or Celtic priests thought that the presence of otherworldly spirits made it easier to make predictions about the future. At the bonfires of the festivals, fortune-telling was done alongside sacrifices, and many participants also donned costumes, often masquerading as animals or beasts, in hope of fooling spirits who might want to harm them. The practices of this fire festival evolved over time, most notably with the spread of Christianity and the Catholic Church. By 43 AD, following Rome conquering most of the Celtic lands. In Jack Santino's Halloween in America, Contemporary Customs and Performances, he explains how, during this time, many of the Celtic traditions were reframed with a Christian narrative in an attempt to capitalize on the popularity of the pagan practices while spreading the new religion. That reframing created many of the Halloween traditions that people still participate in today. It was May 13, in the year 609, that Pope Boniface IV declared a celebration called All Saints' Day, also called All Hallows or All Hallowmas in Middle English. The day before it was thus known as All Hallows Eve, or All Hallows Eve, as History.com explains. The festival was a day to honor Christian martyrs and saints. Later, in the mid-8th century, Pope Gregory III strategically moved the celebration to November 1st, coinciding with the time Samhain would have typically been held. The homage paid to martyrs and saints who passed closely paralleled the appeasement of ghosts of the dead during Samhain. The Church's capitalization on Samhain did not end there. However, participants in the new version of the holiday celebrated in much the same manner as their Celtic forebears had, with bonfires and costumes that reflected the spiritual and otherworldly. The offerings of food and goods to protect themselves from spirits and ancestral ghosts became offerings of food and drink to the poor, displays of generosity and goodwill. And the tricks and pranks attributed to otherworldly and evil spirits manifested themselves in the spirit of the saints. Eventually, All Hallows Eve evolved into Halloween, becoming more popular in secular culture than All Saints' Day. The pagan-themed Christian practices of dressing up in costume, playing pranks, and handing out offerings have evolved into popular traditions, even for those who may not believe in otherworldly spirits or saints. However, whether Halloween celebrants know it or not, they're following the legacy of the ancient Celts who, with the festival of Samhain, celebrated the inevitability of death and rebirth. Okay, so in this article, we learned once again of how this holiday meant to celebrate the dead, ghosts, and those who were walking the earth at the time when they believed the veil to be very thin. On May 13th, this 3-day festival of Samhain was moved by the Pope to November 1st to coincide with the time that Samhain would have been celebrated in order to appease the people. Okay, to appease the people who were coming into this new religion of Christianity. And so November 1st became All Saints' Day, a day to celebrate and commemorate the saints of the church. And the day before it was All Hallows Eve, or Halloween. And Halloween became associated with the activities that took place during the feast and the festival of Samhain. And so that is how we have Halloween being celebrated and people going out looking, asking for candy and things of that nature, and being bewitched and tricked into celebrating a festival that was linked to paganism, for sure. Now, it doesn't state it in the articles that I've read, but in some of the other research I've done, the lines between the worlds apparently was so blurred, and the demonic had taken such a toll and had held such sway on the people during that time that there was actual physical damage that was happening to people. They were being harmed. And so in an attempt to protect themselves, of course, they dressed up in costume, pretending to be somebody else so that the spirits of those who had passed on could not find and haunt them, or the spirits of demons couldn't find them and harm them in any way. In addition to that, in order to appease these evil spirits, or these spirits, the people of these towns celebrating this festival would sacrifice. They would sacrifice food, they would sacrifice their crops, they would sacrifice their animals, and on occasion, perhaps more than on occasion, they would offer up a human sacrifice. And as they are burning these human sacrifices in the fire, and they're burning their bones, and it becomes a bonfire or bonfire. So please understand, family, the origin of bonfire. So the next time you're engaging in a bonfire party, understand where that came from. Understand that it came from the practice of burning bones in a very Celtic celebration of a festival of Samhain. We're now going to read another article from The Sun, the UK edition, that speaks about Samhain and some of the more gruesome aspects of Halloween. So if you have little ones in the room, you may want to scoot them out at this point. Dead scary. Samhain is the pagan origin of Halloween, and its terrifying rituals included human sacrifices and pumpkins filled with burning human fat. Halloween is more than makeup tutorials, and dressing your dog up as a pumpkin. It's the night the veil between the worlds of the living and the dead raises up, and the spirits of our ancestors walk among us. This is an article by AmarYaH. Modern Halloween may have been reduced to little more than scary makeup tutorials on YouTube, but rewind a few thousand years and you'd be planning your human sacrifice, not your outfit. Halloween is regarded as the witches' Shabbat, the equivalent of New Year's Eve. The Druids had many ways of sacrificing humans, one of which was packing them in a giant burning effigy of a man. So here you have an effigy, which is kind of like a scaffolding in the shape of a man. And you see human beings being stuffed into this effigy, and the whole thing will be set on fire. And these people would then be a sacrifice unto the deities or unto the demons. Its roots lie firmly in the old pagan holiday of Samhain, which, along with May 1st, Beltane, was regarded as one of the most important days of the year. On Samhain, it was believed that the veil lifted between the worlds of the living and the dead, allowing spirits, demons, and other mythical creatures such as fairies a chance to walk amongst us. But the reality of Halloween through the eyes of the Celts and Druids is scarier than any horror film. According to old documents, in its most primitive guise, Samhain would have featured many sacrifices to the Celtic gods of death, with both animals and humans thrown into huge fire pits as offerings, bonfires. People claimed the ancient Druids ate their firstborn children on Samhain, or collected the blood of their sacrificial humans in cauldrons and drank it. The stories get gorier, claiming that hollowed-out pumpkins and turnips would be filled with fat from previous sacrifices and lit. It was the arrival of the Romans in 55 BC that signaled the start of the end of the Druid culture in the UK. Julius Caesar even commented about the ancient Brits that in times of danger, unless the life of a man be offered, the mind of immortal gods will not favor them, indicating that in order to benefit at all, people in this culture depended and relied on human sacrifice. So we have one final image in this article, and you'll see pagans here, the ancient Druids, sacrificing a human on a stone slab. And what is behind it looks very much like Stonehenge to me. I don't know about you, but it looks very much like Stonehenge. And people aren't exactly sure what was done at Stonehenge, but it seems to me like there was some pretty pagan things happening at that location at that time. We're going to read a portion of this article from National Geographic. I will not read the whole thing because it is gruesome. So I will just read the safer portions of it. And it's entitled, Druids Committed Human Sacrifice, Cannibalism? This article is by James Owen. Recent evidence that Druids possibly committed cannibalism and ritual human sacrifice, perhaps on a massive scale, add weight to ancient Roman accounts of Druidic savagery, archaeologists say. After a 1st century BC visit to Britain, the Romans came back with horrific stories about these high-ranking priests of the Celts who had spread throughout much of Europe over a roughly 2,000-year period. Julius Caesar, who led the first Roman landing in 55 BC, said the native Celts believed that the gods delight in the slaughter of prisoners and criminals, and when the supply of captives runs short, they sacrifice even the innocent. 1st century historian Pliny the Elder went further, suggesting the Celts practiced ritual cannibalism, eating their enemies' flesh as a source of spiritual and physical strength. But with only the Romans' word to go on, the ancient Celts left no written record of their own. It's been easy for historians to dismiss such tales as wartime propaganda. Until now, that is. Recent gruesome finds appear to confirm the Romans' accounts, according to The Secrets of the Druids, a new documentary airing Saturday on the U.S. National Geographic Channel. Perhaps the most incriminating evidence is the 2,000-year-old bog mummified body of Lindale man discovered in England in the 1980s. Lindau Mann's manicured nails and finely trimmed hair and beard suggest that he may have been of high status, possibly even a druid himself. At least one thing appears clearly certain about the ancient 20-something. He was a victim of a carefully staged sacrifice. And I will end there. I will not go into detail about how it was done, as this article does. The bottom line is that the Druids and the Celts who participated in the Samhain festivals would have done ritual sacrifices to appease the gods. So, with all of that said, this is what they have convinced us to become a part of and to participate in unknowingly. Now, unknowingly, ignorantly, but we have been engaging in the practice that began here thousands of years ago with Druids and Celtics in forests and fields killing people in order to appease demons and false gods. So, Halloween, as you can see, is evil. It seemed evil, it was evil, but we were bewitched. And we didn't understand that we were engaging in activity that was not Yali in any way, shape, or form. And so now that we know better, we must do better. Gone are the days when we can be influenced by the world. Gone are the days when we should allow ourselves to be influenced by influencers on YouTube or any other social media site. Gone are the days when we think that we can participate in activities and festivals and feasts of the world and think that there's not a pagan origin to it. We cannot be so deceived. We cannot be so bewitched. We have to awaken to righteousness and sin not. It's time for us to walk in truth and let go of even this semblance of error. The Most High expects more from us than us participating in the things of this world. So before we end for today, I'm going to just briefly go into a little detail about why certain things are associated with Halloween. For example, the color orange. Why is orange associated with Halloween? Well, it could be because of the pumpkin, yes. But even before the pumpkin was associated with Halloween and it was the turnip instead, the color orange was associated with Halloween because of its association with fall. Oftentimes, there would be orange leaves or rust-colored leaves that would be reminiscent of fall. And then the color black. So oftentimes you'll see the color black and orange being associated with Halloween, while the color black is associated with Halloween because of its darkness. The Feast of Samhain was celebrated at dark around bonfires. The orangey red glow of the fire juxtaposed against the blackness of night gives you orange and black. In addition to that, this was a time of darkness, a time of spiritual darkness, a time of physical darkness, as the days were getting shorter and shorter and shorter at the end of the harvest season in November. So, orange and black being associated with Halloween. Not to mention the color black being associated with death. And this was a time where the focus was darkness and death and how to appease the dead. So why do you see so many ghosts draped in white associated with Halloween? Well, we see this because typically in Celtic days and in ancient days, people would be wrapped in white burial cloths before they are put in the tomb or before they are put into the ground. And so the dead is associated with those who are draped in white, like a mummy. So because of that, in order to mimic the dead, you would go out dressed in white sheets or white cloth to indicate that you are one of the dead, okay? And remember, during this time, those who celebrated the Feast of Samhain were mumming and guising, meaning they were mummifying themselves, dressing themselves as the dead, and trying to disguise themselves, often as animals, to hide from the spirits. We know why bonfires are associated with Halloween because, remember, sacrifices were being made to the gods and to the dead to appease them, and so the bones of these sacrifices, whether animal or human, were burned in the fire. When these huge bonfires would be lit by the Druid priests, insects would be drawn to the bonfires, and as a result, bats would come out at night to eat the insects. And so that is why we see bats associated with the Feast of Samhain and with Halloween. Additionally, one of the things that occurred very often during the Feast of Samhain is divination. There would be those who would try to attempt to predict the future. And so since this was a time where the veil was apparently thinned, they would be able to tap into the spiritual realm and gain information for the future. So there was all manner of divination being practiced during this time, often by those who would be considered the quote-unquote wise women of the community, who are also called witches. Okay, so you see witches associated with Halloween, and you see divination, people looking into crystal balls trying to determine what their future will be. The Celtics and others believe that if you saw a spider in your home during the Feast of Samhain, that it was a loved one come to visit. And so you shouldn't kill the spider in your home on Halloween. And so that is why Halloween decorations include lots and lots of spiders and spider webs. In addition to all of the things mentioned, the black cat is also associated with witches and also with Halloween in general. And so when you look at the images that are associated with Halloween, you'll see black cats and witches also featured prominently. And the black cat has been associated with superstition, with evil, and because they are nocturnal and because during the Feast of Samhain, they would have been out roaming at that time. It's also purported that witches were able to transform themselves into black cats. So you see the correlation between black cats and witches, both associated with Halloween. Additionally, some believed at this time that if you displayed a black cat in front of your house, that it would protect you from the evil forces and the evil spirits that were roaming at night. And today, people decorate their homes with black cats at Halloween, and witches and pumpkins and all of these things. Samhain was the festival celebrated in Great Britain, in the Celtic regions of Great Britain, Ireland and Scotland. But there is a feast associated with celebrating the dead in just about every culture. It goes to show you that these things are linked to the demonic. The Most High Yahuwah never told us to celebrate the dead. He never did, because he is the Eluah of the living and not of the dead. So to have association with these things and their black cats and their bobbing for apples, which was a British courting ritual, by the way, that's how it began. So all of these things have some sort of significance for darkness and celebrating darkness. And that is why we are to avoid them. That is why we are to have no part of the wickedness and the darkness of this world. So we're going to read a few verses of scripture, and then we're going to end for the day. 1 Yachanan, 1 John chapter 2. Love not the world, neither the things that are in the world. If any man love the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life, is not of the Father, but is of the world. And the world passes away, and the lust thereof. But he that does the will of the Father abides forever. Little children, it is the last time. And as ye have heard that Antichrist shall come, even now are there many Antichrists or Anti-Mashiachs, whereby we know that it is the last time. They went out from us, but they were not of us. For if they had been of us, they would no doubt have continued with us. But they went out, that they might be made manifest that they were not of us. So we have people who come into the awakening, and it appears as if they're in truth, but they're not. They start well, but do they finish well? But ye have an unction from the Holy One, the Kadash One, and you know all things. I have not written unto you because you know not the truth, but because you know it, and that no lie is of the truth. And after watching this video today, perhaps you have a little bit more truth than you had before. The things of this world are not for us, not in any way, shape, or form. The world may try to make them seem benign, tame even. They may try to make it seem as if, oh, it's no harm. Oh, it's just a little candy. Oh, it's just a little trick or treat. But now you know, you have a better idea of the origins of this pagan and heinous holiday. And it is not anything that we should be involved in at all. But not just this holiday, all of them. They all have something to do with an aspect of living that is self-focused, that is linked to paganism, and that is not pleasing to the Most High. So we've got to let go of all of these things and run and cleave to Yahuwah through Yahusha. So I pray that you have gotten something out of this lesson today and understand the pagan insertions into not only our scriptures, but into our culture by bewitching us and making us think that these things are for us. They are not for us. These are the ways of our sinful neighbors. And the Father told us to come away from them and be separate and touch not the unclean thing, and that He would receive us. So if we want to be gathered out of the places to which we've been scattered, we must separate and isolate ourselves from wickedness and come apart and come away and separate and isolate ourselves from them and touch not their wicked things nor their wicked deeds. And Yahuwah will receive us. Thank you for joining me once again on the channel, brothers and sisters, and for another session of our Pagan Insertions in the Scriptures, Holiday Edition. I pray that the Most High Yahuwah would speak to you through this lesson and that you would make the necessary changes. May the Most High Yahuwah baruch and keep you, and may He make His face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. May He lift up His countenance upon you and grant you shalom, peace in every area. And may you come to understand the seriousness of the world in which we live. There's nothing harmless. There's harm in things, even though it may be being masqueraded as being harmless. We have to understand the time that we're living in and cling and cleave to the Most High like we cling and cleave to our next breath. Yahuwah be praised. Shalom, shalom, brothers and sisters. Shalom, shalom. Thank you.